All right, good evening, happy Thursday, and welcome one and all. I'm Sheila Boston, the 69th president of the New York City Bar Association. And this evening, I am excited to present to you the second installment of my presidential series. That is programming which is intended to highlight the successes and challenges of Black women and girls. We have a very large and diverse membership at the City Bar, about 25,000 members. And I am in awe of its membership as we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the talent in the New York City legal community. And it is indeed humbling to represent all of you. But as most of you know, there is some historical significance to my current position, as I am the first woman of color to serve as president of this august 151-year-old institution. As such, I felt it incumbent upon me to do something in honor of my demographic, that being Black women and girls. Why? Because frankly, we have a national history of Black women being overlooked, undervalued, and marginalized. Things are getting much better, and I'm happy for that. But given this special platform and office as president of what I call the Bar of Hope, I wish to do my part in advancing this segment of our society and profession. So today, I wish to present to you a program entitled Raising the Bar of Hope, a candid conversation with Black women law school deans. Before I introduce our distinguished guests, I must thank our sponsor, Counsel on the Profession, co-chaired by Dean Matthew Diller of Fordham and Melissa Colon Bosselet. Co-sponsoring committees of the City Bar include Women in the Profession, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Minorities in the Profession. Thanks to all of you. And our co-sponsoring organization is the New York City Bar Office for Diversity and Inclusion, of which our very own James A. Lewis V is executive director. With that, oh, you know who else? I have to give a shout out to my beloved Kevin Magyup. He is our IT extraordinaire. So thank you, Kevin, so much. Let me introduce our guest. And let me tell you, usually I cut it short, but I'm sorry. I have to honor these beautiful, wonderful, intelligent women. So the bio's gonna be a little long, but just bear with me because you gotta hear what it is that they've done and who they are. First, we have Danielle R. Holly Walker. Danielle is the Dean and Professor of Law at Howard University School of Law. Dean Holly Walker earned a BA from Yale University and her JD from Harvard University. After law school, she clerked for Chief Judge Carl E. Stewart of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She also practiced civil litigation at Fulbright and Jaworski in Houston, Texas. Before joining the Howard faculty, she was the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of South Carolina. Dean Holly Walker teaches Civ Pro, Administrative Law, Legislation and Regulation, Federal Courts, and Inequality and Education. Dean Holly Walker's ongoing research agenda deals with the governance of public schools and diversity in the legal profession. She has published articles on issues of civil rights and education, including recent articles on No Child Left Behind, charter school policy, desegregation plans, and affirmative action in higher education. She's won numerous awards. She's very active in her community. She's been awarded the GWAC. I have to give this shout out because I'm a member of the NBA Trailblazer Award from the Greater Washington Area chapter of the NBA's Women Lawyers Division. Whoop, whoop. And she also received the University of South Carolina Educational Foundation Service Award for performing significant service to the university and community. She was twice awarded the law school's Outstanding Faculty Member Award during her time at the University of South Carolina. She's been named by the state newspaper as one of the top 20 under 40 leaders for the state of South Carolina. And she's done so much more. I have to also mention she's on the board of the Lawyers Committee of Civil Rights. Welcome, Dean Holly Walker. And I'm gonna pose the first question to you because we always do fun facts when we introduce people. Tell us, and as we sometimes say, tell the truth, shame the devil. What was it that you wanted to be when you were a child?
So I wanted to be a law professor and maybe a judge. From the time, if you asked me that at 3 years old, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say, I want to be a lawyer and a law professor. Was my answer, even that young, which would shock adults who were expecting, Batwoman or
astronaut,
Wonder Woman, right. Astronaut, fireman. So my unique way into the profession, I'm a second generation lawyer, second generation law professor, second generation law dean. So my father is still a faculty member. He teaches currently at Thurgood Marshall School of Law. He's Dean Emeritus of Thurgood Marshall. And I grew up a faculty brat, as they would say. My mother was an accounting professor, dad law professor at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, Texas Southern University. So I grew up on the campus of Texas Southern University, 3rd Ward, Houston, Texas. And I just really loved the academic environment from the very beginning. I loved being inside the law school as a child. I loved watching my dad teach evidence or criminal procedure. And so I knew from the time I was very, very young that the law was really my calling, and that teaching was my calling. It was the family business. And so, I kind of come by it naturally.
Thank you so much for sharing, and shout out to your dad wherever he is.
Yeah, shout out to dad.
Next, we have Dayna Bowen Matthew. Dean Matthew is a nationally recognized lawyer and legal scholar with 3 decades of industry and academic experience, and she's the first woman, hear me, the first woman to lead George Washington University's law school. An expert in health equity and public health policy with a passion for public service, Dean Matthew previously served as the University of Virginia Law School's William L. Matheson and Robert M. Morgenthau, Distinguished Professor of Law, we know that name up here in New York, and the F. Palmer Weber Research Professor of Civil Liberties and Human Rights. She was also a professor of public health sciences at the UVA School of Medicine and served as director of the Equity Center at UVA, which works to build relationships between the university and its surrounding community to address racial and socioeconomic inequality. Prior to her tenure at UVA, she served as professor of law, vice dean, and associate dean of academic affairs at the University of Colorado Law School. And before that, as professor of law and medicine at the University of Kentucky College of Law. Dean Matthew has held a number of important positions in the policy world. She served as the Robert Wood Johnson Health Policy Fellow and as a senior advisor in the Office of Civil Rights at the EPA. She also is a non-resident fellow in the Center for Health Policy at the Brookings Institution. A prolific writer, she's the author of a book. It's entitled Just Medicine, A Cure for Racial Inequality in American Healthcare. And she's authored or co-authored dozens of books, chapters, and articles focusing largely on healthcare reform, public health law, health disparities, patient protection, and antitrust law, and civil rights. Dean Matthew received a BA in economics from Harvard Radcliffe College, a JD from the UVA School of Law, and a PhD in health and behavioral sciences from the University of Colorado, Denver. We welcome Dean Dayna Bowen Matthew. All right, give it up. When you were a child, what did you want to be?
I'm afraid I was that kid that wanted to be everything, but the only thing that was consistent is that I wanted to set wrong things right. So whatever I went into, I was like, that's not right, I'm going to change that. So I went through astronaut, engineer, math teacher, banker, candlestick maker, but every time I wanted to change injustices and make them just, and landed on law because that's where I really could have that impact.
Amen for that. Okay, y'all got to get used to me. I just got to tell you, I am a preacher's daughter. And now I'm a preacher's wife. So, I throw out certain things at times. So just work with me, bear with me. Awesome. We are so happy to have you here, Dean.
Thank you.
Next, we have Kimberly Mutchison. Kimberly Mutchison is co-dean and professor of law at Rutgers Law School in Camden. Dean Mutcheson is a reproductive justice scholar whose work sits at the intersection of bioethics, health law, and family. She has a particular focus on assisted reproduction, abortion, disability, and medical decision-making for pregnant women and children. Cambridge University Press released her edited volume entitled Feminist Judgments, Reproductive Justice, rewritten in 2020. In 2021, Dean Mutcheson received the Association of American Law Schools inaugural Impact Award as a co-founder of the Law Dean's Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project. She received the Center for Reproductive Rights Innovation and Scholarship Award in 2013, a Chancellor's Teaching Excellence Award in 2011, and the Women's Law Caucus Faculty Appreciation Award in 2011 and 2014. Dean Mutcheson has been a senior fellow sabbatical visitor at the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law at Columbia Law School. That's my alma mater, I just gotta say. Shout out to the current dean, Jillian Lester. She's also been a visiting scholar at the Center for Bioethics at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her BA from the University of Pennsylvania and her JD from Columbia Law School. She also received the Kirkland and Ellis Fellowship for postgraduate public interest work upon her graduation from Columbia. Prior to joining the faculty at Rutgers, Dean Mutcheson was a consulting attorney at the Center for Reproductive Law and Policy, now called the Center for Reproductive Rights, and a staff attorney at the HIV Law Project. Welcome, Dean Mutcheson. All right, share it with us.
So first of all, if we could even begin to match your level of energy, this is just going to be off the charts. I am so impressed by the amount of energy that's coming through this screen right now. So thank you so much for having us. So I'm pretty boring because I knew by the time I was about 10 years old that I wanted to be a lawyer. The kind of lawyer that I imagined myself to be was basically, a female Thurgood Marshall. I was going to be arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court and, totally changing the world. So being a lawyer is exactly what I expected and wanted to be. Being a legal academic and a law dean was nowhere on the list that I was anticipating for my future.
Awesome. Note to self. I don't know. I see a pattern here. I just think that those who think early on that they're going to go in academia, they do it. But I don't know. We'll see. We have one more chance here. Let's see what happens. We have with us, finally, last but not least of all, certainly, Eboni S. Nelson. Dean Eboni Nelson became Dean of the University of Connecticut School of Law on July 31, 2020, not long ago. Yay! We're proud of you. She came to UConn from the University of South Carolina School of Law, where she taught for 13 years. From 2018 onward, she served as the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. At South Carolina Law, she received the Best Classroom Teacher and Outstanding Faculty Service Awards. Before joining the South Carolina Law faculty in 2007, Dee Nelson taught at the Thurgood Marshall School of Law and practiced employee benefits law at the law firm Bracewell LLP in Houston, Texas. Her scholarship focuses on education law and policy, and she's especially interested in the availability of educational opportunities for disadvantaged and minority students. Dee Nelson graduated summa cum laude from Wake Forest University and earned her JD from Harvard Law School, where she served as a contracts teaching assistant to then Professor Elizabeth Warren, now a notable US Senator. Throughout her career, Dee Nelson has been committed to public service. She served as the chair of the South Carolina Commission on Consumer Affairs and vice chair of the South Carolina State Advisory Committee to the US Commission on Civil Rights. She's also been a member of the Law School Admission Council Finance and Legal Affairs Committee and the American Bar Association Sabbatical Review Site Team. She's currently a member of the Law School Admission Council Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Dee Nelson teaches in the fields of contracts, commercial law, consumer law, and race, class, and education. If we were in person, we'd all be clapping, shouting, but welcome, Dean Eboni S. Nelson.
Thank you.
All right, Dean Nelson, you're the last one. You're our last hope. You're gonna tell us an astronaut, firefighter, something. What did you want to be when you were a child?
I wish. I wanted to be Perry Mason. I wanted to be Matlock. I wanted to be Claire Huxtable. So again, very early on, I wanted to be a lawyer, but specifically, I wanted to be a lawyer helping children. And I really don't know where that came from, but I really had this desire to help children, particularly children who had experienced abuse. And just for some reason, just seeing, some children that have had that experience in my own neighborhoods and, my own family, that really prompted me to want to be an advocate on their behalf. And so although my legal career didn't go in that particular route, I think in some respects, that's what led me probably to want to become a professor and want to become a dean and my scholarship interest is helping children and being there to help, people along their educational way in particular and being of service to them. But yep, no astronaut.
All good.
No firewoman, nothing like that. Still had that advocacy and, legal lawyer bug, I guess.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, half of it, I think it is exposure. Let's be honest. At my dinner table when I was growing up, we talked a lot of religion, politics, and law. And so I knew I was probably going to be a political broadcaster, a lawyer, or a preacher. So I get it. Well, welcome one and all. All right. So we know that, you've actually achieved those childhood dreams, at least of being lawyers and in academia. Let's start out with Dean Holly Walker. Share with us a little bit about your professional journey. What were the talents? What were your exposures? Were there mentors? What set you on the path to actually becoming dean and not just teacher or professor at a law school?
I think everyone's professional journey, this is a question. Thank you so much again, by the way, for having us. We want to celebrate you too in your historic role in this bar association. That is not a small thing, to be the first president who's a woman of color after 150 plus years. So part of the reason that we all wanted to be here tonight is to really celebrate your historic leadership. And so I just want to say that first. I think for me, the professional journey seemed I have to say, I'm a law professor who did not like law school, especially in my first year. And so I began to doubt. I did not doubt before I came to law school, but once I got to law school, I really doubted the career path that I chose. And I think it was taking a class with a couple of professors who really inspired me. And I'll say their names here because so often we don't say their names. Chris Edley, who later became the Dean of Berkeley, and Pinda Hare, who was a civil rights lawyer who helped to found the Advancement Project. I took a class with them called Civil Rights Project in law school. I saw the work that civil rights lawyers were doing, and that really set me on the path that I'm on now in terms of focusing what I wanted to do in terms of my scholarship. I gained another very important mentor in Carl Stewart, who is a judge on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, who I clerked for. I think from him, the main lesson that I learned is you don't have to give up family. You don't have to give up friends. You can be a very kind person, someone who serves the community, someone who is involved in their church family, someone who is really seen as a strong member of the community. I learned that from him very strongly. And that, again, reaffirmed the fact that I could, I think, go to the higher parts of the profession without losing the essence of who I am. And then finally, I always, in terms of my professional journey and mentorship, I think establishing relationships with people I had a lot in common with, including, colleagues like Dee Nelson, who came after I came to South Carolina. Those professional relationships with Eboni and with many other colleagues helped me to feel very revitalized in a position that can feel very alone. So I think all academics who are academics of color, especially Black women, there are not very many of us. And sometimes that strength and encouragement that we need comes from peer mentors. And so Dee Nelson, for me, is one of my peer mentors, someone who really inspired and encouraged me as I moved. And we both moved from assistant professor to associate professor to tenure to full professor to associate deans. Having other colleagues really encourage me to do that, I think, was a key part to me wanting to go further in terms of academic leadership and then a deanship.
Wonderful. And since we're calling out names, I think that's so important, just to have an attitude of gratitude. I want to give a shout out to now the current president of Rice University down in Texas. He was my torts professor at Columbia. And what do I do now? Products liability. So yes. Bless him. Okay. How about Dean Mutcheson? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
So first of all, David Lebron was also my torts professor. So there we go. As I said, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. I was also a person who didn't particularly like law school. But one of the things that was very lucky for me when I was at Columbia is that there were multiple Black professors there who were just amazing people and were incredibly inspirational to me. So, Kim Crenshaw was there, Patricia Williams, Kellis Parker, Kendall Thomas, just a really amazing group of people. And even so, I never imagined myself as a law professor, right? They were just some of the smartest people I'd ever met in my entire life. There was no way that I could do that work. So I was working as a public interest lawyer and living in Brooklyn, in a rent stabilized apartment, luckily, and thinking to myself, there's no way I can stay in New York making this kind of money. Like, I need to make more money. And I ended up seeing an ad in the New York Times education supplement one Sunday for the lawyering program at NYU. And it was for a full-time job, and I wasn't looking for a full-time job, but I thought, we'll see. Had basically convinced myself not to apply for it because I just wasn't qualified. There's no way I would get the job. And, I had a whole set of reasons why I shouldn't apply. On the last day you could turn in your application, I left my job, went up to Columbia to get a hard copy of my transcript, and then brought my application down to NYU. got a phone call a few weeks later, went in for an interview, got a second interview after that. And next thing I knew, I was, teaching lawyering at NYU Law School, having made no plans for that at all, right? I didn't do anything in law school that you should do if you want to become a law professor. So taking that job is really what launched me into legal academia. I almost certainly would not have been able to do it without taking that job. And again, I was very lucky. The person who was running the lawyering program at that time was Peggy Davis, a Black woman who had previously been a family court judge. And so she became a mentor to me. And then eventually I got the job at Rutgers, and I've been there for a very long time. And as much as I was an accidental law professor, I then became an accidental vice dean. And then when our dean left, I became a very reluctant, frankly, dean at the law school. So, my path has been, the only thing that I knew was that I wanted to be a lawyer, and the rest of this has just been sort of things that have happened to me, but mostly because I've been open to the idea of new opportunities that fall into my lap.
Thank you for sharing. It's not accidental. You're where you're meant to be, and it's just about preparation, meeting opportunity. And let's just be clear. Okay, Dean Matthew, how about you next? Tell us a little bit about your journey, please.
So of course, I will scare people when I say it started with my parents, because it sounds like I might be doing a memoir for my entire life. But I do have to honor my mother and my father, because they moved me from relative poverty to where I am today at the expense of their own lives. So my father died at 49, my mother at 61, and what they did was work 6 jobs between them to make sure that my brother and I could stand where I stand right now. So those were my first inspirers. They believed in me. I write about them in my new book. I hope it's okay to say that, but right now I'm feeling pretty indebted to them and emotionally committed to making sure I lift them up. My story and my journey really is a part of what inspires me today to give improbable people an opportunity to shine. Because at every turn, mentors and people who picked me had no reason to, other than, I would say, the hand of God said, try her. And I got opportunities that were outstanding and unusual. So they started, my first job was with a management consulting firm that does not exist anymore. It was called Garley, Frankel and Marsh. And they were dedicated to helping women lead. So they would go into high schools and tell us, you get a little stipend, come to work dressed for success. And now you have a job and a set of courses. And I got that job in high school. The next thing that happened to me, believe it or not, that's on my mind to share in my journey is that my high school English teacher cast me as Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. In the predominantly white school I was in, that was improbable. It didn't come to pass, and the injustice of me not being able to perform that stuck with me. It could have made me angry, but it stuck with me and became a theme of making wrong things right. Fast forward out of high school, really the next thing that happened to me in my journey towards becoming a law dean was that and here's a theme, torts professor came to me when I was practicing law and said, how about trying to teach? I had no idea about an academic career. If it wasn't for my torts professor and my tax professor sitting me down in a room and mooting my job talk, I wouldn't have this career today. The dean that I was vice dean under at the University of Colorado caught me in the hall and said, how about being the associate dean? And I told him I did not know what an associate dean did or was. An improbable opportunity came my way. I realized that I had some gifts in administration and loved it. I did not apply for any dean job other than the one I hold right now, because secret, I did not think people who wanted to be dean were my kind of people. So this ended up an opportunity that gave me a chance to fulfill my life's mission, justice. I live my life by a verse in an Old Testament scripture, Proverbs 31:8-9, that says basically, cry out for the justice that you believe the needy and the poor, the blind, and the halt and the lame seek. And that's what I look for chances to do. And that's what seemed to be the platform here. So here I am.
I can relate. Mine is to whom much is given, much is required. Dee Nelson, tell us about your journey.
For me, and I thank Dean Matthews so much for honoring her parents in that wonderful way. And it got me to thinking about my parents, particularly my mom. So my mom was the captain of her cheerleading squad in high school. My dad was the captain of the basketball team in high school. They graduated in June, and lo and behold came me in July. And so for the first 8 years of my life, my mom raised me as a single mother. And although she went to work to take care of me, she instilled in me the power of education during those 8 years. And once my parents married, when I turned 8 and I was the flower girl, they continued to instill in me the fact that education brings opportunity and it opens up the gateways to opportunities and can really catapult you beyond your circumstances. And I really thank them for instilling that in me, because in essence, that's really, has carried me throughout my entire journey. I actually loved law school. I had a wonderful 3 years there, but of course had no idea that I wanted to get into teaching while doing that. And so, as you heard in the bio, I started my career down in Houston, Texas. It took a position with the firm right after law school. Accepted that position, in the summer before my 3rd year. They called me up a month later and said, well, the partner that you worked for, she left the firm. You can rescind your acceptance if you want. I said, well, no need to do that. I'll just come, and worst case scenario, you guys will hire a not so nice person and I'll leave in a year. Well, that pretty much is what happened. And I left in 6 months. And so I called up Gracewell and said, I know I said no thank you a year, 6 months ago, but do you still have the need? And thankfully they did. And thankfully, I created great relationships with people that they gave me that opportunity. I greatly enjoyed my work. I did ERISA work, employee benefits. And when the HIPAA privacy rules came around, I was very instrumental in, going out to clients and doing CLEs, informing people that I know the regs are proposed right now, but they really are going to become final. You really have to do all of this if you're covered. And while I enjoyed that, it wasn't as fulfilling as I wanted it to be. And I actually thought about leaving the law very early on. And just in those 2 years, I thought about leaving. But I love the law. And again, it's what I'd always wanted to do, what I always wanted to be. And so I wasn't ready to leave the law altogether. So I thought back, well, what were some of those experiences that I had in law school that really I felt were impactful and it really brought me joy? And there were 2. One, I was a tutor for first-year students who had not performed as well as they would have liked on exams. And being able to be there for my fellow student and help counsel them, I remembered really enjoying. And the second is, as you mentioned, having the opportunity to serve as a teaching assistant for Professor Warren. And that experience, and Danielle talked about mentorship, not just mentorship, but sponsorship. The fact that, I did not have the highest grade in her class, but yet she saw something in me and she, gave me that opportunity to be a teaching assistant. And again, that joy and fulfillment of helping my fellow student and helping my peers, that always stayed with me. And so I had the opportunity to serve as an adjunct professor at the University of Houston, teaching taxation of compensation. And again, loved that idea of giving back, of being of service. And thankfully, Thurgood Marshall School of Law gave me a shot. And I will be forever thankful and grateful for them giving me that opportunity. And some we can talk about later in the conversation, being able to earn my stripes as a law professor at an HBCU where I didn't have to deal with some of the issues and some of the presumed incompetence and things like that we all have to encounter in other environments was very, very, I was very fortunate for that. And then came the opportunity to move back home to South Carolina, where I'm originally from. And basically I followed Danielle around. Wherever Danielle goes, I go. But I was very fortunate to have her and other wonderful, strong women and women of color at South Carolina to serve as mentors as well as sponsors, and to think of me for opportunities that came down the road. And so wanting to be of greater service, that's how I ended up in the academic dean position. And then like Dayna, this was my first and thankfully successful, throwing the hat in the ring for that higher level of leadership. And it has been the most fulfilling professional position so far that I've had. Being the dean of UConn Law School has been the most challenging as well, and we will talk about that. But it is an honor. It's an honor to be of service, not only to the institution, but to the profession and to this greater call for justice. So that's my journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies, for sharing. Just inspirational. And I hope you have inspired some others to follow your tracks. Okay. In the news, and there's been research that suggests that Black women, believe it or not, are the most educated demographic in the United States right now, having at least 2 degrees. What's up with that? I just, because I started out talking about how we tend to be marginalized, and yet there's this great statistic. I'm only going to ask maybe 1 or 2 of you to comment on this. I'm going to pick on, I feel like we're doing the Socratic method. How about Dean Mutchison? What do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of things that go into that, right? I mean, so one is, and probably all of us or most of us have had this experience of growing up in families where education was so key, right? And education is what changed the trajectory of your family, right? Being able to go to school and get degrees. So I think that is a part of it. And I also think, Black women have been carrying our community for a very long time. And I think that really continues to be the case. And, we do the work, we recognize that if we're going to walk into a room that we need to be credentialed in order to be there and to be taken seriously. And so, we do the things that we have to do in order to be able to be successful. And in the world that we live in, that's at least a college degree and probably something after that as well.
Anybody else wish to chime in on this?
I would just add, if I could very briefly, what's interesting to me about that statistic is despite that, we still see these disparities. We see these disparities in our professional attainment. We, of course, see that same disparity when it comes to salaries when compared to our white colleagues. And so it really is very discouraging, actually, when we know that we are so credentialed, we are so qualified, but yet we're not receiving the same opportunities. And it also makes me question, this idea of merit, this fallacy of meritocracy of, as long as you have those qualifications, you can get to anywhere you want to get to, and you can achieve to the highest heights as you want to. But if that were truly the case, if there were not systems still in place, there was not unconscious bias and things of that nature, I think you would see those higher levels of attainment in so many different areas where we see these wonderfully credentialed Black women. And so it's important for us to think about that when you think about those statistics compared to others.
I want to chime in, if I may, and just say, in following Dee Nelson, as I love to do, in comparison to others, one of the things that's troubling in the legal profession is that Black attorneys represent only about 5% of partners. Black women attorneys represent fewer than 3% of partners in law firms. Why do we get these degrees? I want to say that part of it is because we are overcoming stereotypes and biases that are systemically leveled against, in my opinion, Black women more virulently than any other population in the United States. So some of what we do, I think, is, as Dean Mutcheson said, we carry the soul of a nation. We vote the way that the nation needs to go, right? We work and we educate the way that a nation needs to go. And then we prove ourselves over and over again to the nation. And the components of that proof are getting these degrees. So we can say, we deserve to be here, even though we are the ones carrying the nation.
I think the only thing that I wanted to add is that these statistics don't come without a cost. And I think the burden on Black women, our health, our ability to be able to achieve all the things that we want at the same time being paid less for the same work, sometimes for more qualifications, that we need to be careful when we talk about the achievements of Black women to think about really carefully what the cost of those achievements are. And, you know, lower life expectancies, higher infant mortality rates, the inability to get good healthcare and good childcare for reasonable amounts, all of those things. I think when we see women who are striving in the way that Black women are striving in the face of so much structural inequality, there is significant cost to that striving.
Thank you so much for bringing up that point. I really appreciate it. You know, so shout out to Arnold and Porter. That's my law firm. We're in the AmLaw 100. I just recently came back from Corporate Counsel Women of Color Conference. It was in LA. Shout out to Lori Robinson Hayden. She's now married. She's my fellow Oxon Hill High School alum. And it was just such a beautiful time. And frankly, one of the things or one of the areas we do focus upon is health. And I'm talking about mental health, the soul, as well as physical, because that's so important. And actually, one of my 6 main initiatives at the City Bar is mental health and wellness. And I mean, it's especially important now, given that we're in a pandemic. It hasn't passed, we are still in a pandemic, may I just say that. So it's very important. So thank you all. All right, so let's get into something just a little more, you know, mundane, sorry. But, you know, we say you're law school deans. All right, first thing that comes to my mind, quite frankly, is, okay, so they get to hire and fire faculty. Students probably, I don't know, students probably come into their offices all the time demanding things, and I think fundraising. Those are the first 3 things that tend to come to my mind. But please, I'm sure there's, you know, fallacy here. Could one of you tell us about the nuts and bolts of what is it that you guys actually do as law school deans? All right.
If only we could fire faculty. That is a huge fallacy.
There's a board, I know. But explain, do explain.
So, you know, the role of a law school dean is so multifaceted, and probably in ways that I didn't even completely understand at the time that I got the job. So, you know, on one hand, you're a manager, but you're also a counselor, but you're also a confidant, and you're a fundraiser. You know, so on any given day, you might have, you know, a meeting with somebody who's a possible donor, and then you have a meeting with a faculty member who wants to talk about something, and then you go to an event that the students are holding, and then you have to, you know, leave campus to go to a different event. And so it's really just all these pieces that you're constantly trying to figure out how to make them all fit together. And the skill set that is involved in this job is just extraordinary. It's easy to see why so many people do it poorly, right? Once you're doing it yourself, because it requires a great deal and an ability. And this is a thing that I think that as Black women, we tend to be very good at, right? You're just code switching constantly, you know, throughout the day, because you're talking to so many different constituencies who want different things from us.
Can I just say that sounded a lot like being the president of a bar association that's really big. Just saying, it just harkened to me. You were speaking to me. I could relate. Okay. Anybody else want to add? Was there anything else to add?
The only thing I would add is that the ability to oversee admissions, student affairs, career services, and also alumni and development. So even though we don't work on the front lines of all of those things all the time, I forgot facilities, administration, operations. So HR, you're talking about facilities, like, I mean, you know, oh, there's a roof leak, especially for those of us who have older buildings, learning where your roof leaks and who are the people to call to fix it. So it is really like operating a small or very large, depending on the size of your law school, business or corporation, because you really have to be able to budget, you have to be able to raise money, you have to be able to manage people. And I think in the pandemic, and this is one thing we've all been leaning on each other a lot, people need a lot more from us. Our students need more from us, our faculty need more from us, our staff need more from us. And we really become kind of consoler in chief, encourager in chief, all of those things that are needed to keep the operations of the law school going. And I think having a great team around you, for me, that is one of the hardest things to do and one of the most necessary things to do as a law school dean.
Who has been dean the longest? Is it? I think it's Walker.
Probably
Right?
me.
That's what I think.
I started in 2014. This is my 8th year.
Okay, so what do you
all my hat is off to you. That is amazing. 8 years is what we all aspire to.
We celebrate.
I celebrate you. Can I add one thing? Because I, along with Dee Nelson, maybe the newest, no, okay, well, I'm new. Let's say this is something that everything that each of my sister deans has said is part of our job. You're really the CEO of an organization. But what makes this the most rewarding job that I've ever had is the task of setting vision and direction for an institution. So Lonnie Greene wrote an article that I am not able to cite or title correctly, but it was something like admissions as a political act. And I feel very inspired by that article every single day that I occupy this office and have the privilege of leading the GW Law School. I feel as though every decision I make about a leaky roof or a person who is being admitted or how many paper clips we're going to order is a political act towards the vision that I have set for myself and for the institution. And I get the privilege of setting that vision. Can't fire anybody like you, Dee Mutchison. I sure have a short list, but what I can do is reward people who align with that vision. And that makes me feel as though I'm aiming for it. I can reward students who can be admitted and would not otherwise if there was another dean sitting in this chair. And I can give rewards to faculty, to alumni, to people who are doing the thing that I see as the vision for the law school. And I always tell people, you don't like this decision and you don't like this vision, the next dean will have a different one. But right now, this is our vision and this is our direction. And that's the privilege, I think, of leading a law school.
Again, it resonates with me. I'm just saying I have 6 main objectives for our city bar. So, okay, I'm loving this. Other ladies, anyone else want to opine or share with us, what you find, what you like the best, I guess, about being a law school dean? What function?
Absolutely. I think one of the other great privileges is, we have the opportunity as dean to help build relationships with so many different people to help others achieve their professional and personal goals. So whether that's students who their goal is to join the New York City bar exam, pass the bar, join the association, work, as a district attorney or work as, in a law firm, we can help create those relationships or help strengthen those relationships to help provide those kind of opportunities for our students. For our staff colleagues, who always had a great idea, but it was never, never given the opportunity for nurturing of that idea or seeing that idea actually come to fruition. As dean, we can support that idea, not just in words, but in deeds, in order for these great ideas to come to fruition and the professional and personal empowerment that we can help instill in our community and in our colleagues and help connect our law school to the community. That type of relationship building and empowering those within our community that we care about is one of the most rewarding aspects of the job for sure.
Dean Holly Walker, I'm coming back to you because you've been doing this the longest. I'm curious, what is the top or the top 2 challenges of being a law school dean? Top 2.
Oh my goodness, I could give you a list of 100 probably. I think for me, it is really that you never have time off, right? So there is no such thing as taking a day off from a deanship. So whether you are on vacation, and I have had to learn and discipline myself to actually take actual vacations, 1 week or multiple, and then short vacations around, but there's never a time when I'm not the dean of Howard University School of Law. So I think that idea that you are always on, even I remember one of my favorite things that happened is probably year 3 or 4 of my deanship. I get up early in the morning. I was on vacation, Martha's Vineyard, get up early in the morning to go get coffee. I look a mess. And I am like, I've stayed up all night with my girlfriends. We've been having such a good time. I run into 3 members of the board of trustees of the university at coffee and was expected to talk about the vision and priorities and strategic plan for the law school at about 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. So that to me is one of the biggest challenges. I think the second thing is that the demands of what is happening in our country at the moment, our crisis in democracy, our ongoing, since 1619 crisis in racial justice and racial equity, what is needed to make our community safer and have more equity in terms of marginalized communities is just tremendous. So I think that burden that I feel like I need to provide my students with a level of education that prepares them to be really social justice warriors, which we at Howard Law call social engineers. That kind of clarion call from 100 years ago feels even more urgent, even more prescient today. And so that for me is the other challenge, is to live up to the expectation and to the demands of this moment, to be a leader at this moment in any way, but especially to lead young people who will be charged with changing so much of what is wrong in our world. To me is sometimes it's a heavy burden. It keeps me up at night thinking, are we able to prepare them for the just dramatic and intense challenges that are ahead for them?
Wow, I appreciate that. So that kind of segues into my next question. We've talked a little bit about challenges of just being a law school dean, but we are gathered here tonight because you are Black women law school deans. So I have to pose the question, are there any challenges which you face as law school deans? Because, if you will, you are Black women. Talk to me. Dee Nelson, I'm going to call you out because we had a great conversation about this. So talk to me.
Well, I think on one hand, one of the particular challenges of being a Black female dean is just like when we were Black female professors, we're often called upon for all the things, which,
Can you say that again? What was that?
Often called on simply because of our identities and simply because of the positions that we hold when coupled with our identities. And again, on one hand, that's a wonderful honor, right? And we show up and we do it because of, again, those great relationship buildings and being of service. But it is taxing, to Dean Holly Walker's point raised, earlier. It is taxing on our time. It's taxing on our time away from our families. It's taxing on our time, just simply with ourselves to just be. And as Dean Holly Walker said, because the deanship, you never turn it off. I mean, it literally is in my dream. So I had a colleague ask me a couple of days ago, how's it going? I was like, oh, I'm at that point where I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning thinking about our Centennial Founders Day that's coming up at the end of this month. So it's like, even in your dreams, the job shows up. But again, we show up. And, I think that can be very taxing. And then with everything that's going on around us and in our world and in our communities that are personal to us, to our children, to our families, to our brothers, to our nephews, to our cousins, the mental aspect of dealing with that, we often, it's a challenge to not leave it at home because we can't leave it at home, but yet we're supposed to be 100,000% in our jobs when everything that is going on is really weighing on us. And I said, to someone recently, I never thought I would be in tears as often as I have been in my first year as dean, sporadically, just without even, it just bubbling up because of the student that I'm meeting with or the faculty member that I'm having a discussion with, simply because of everything with regards to racial and social justice and the pandemic. And so that can be extra taxing for us as Black women, because again, we have those family and friend and community issues that are touching us personally, but yet we have to show up and, keep doing all the things.
So let me break that down just for the law firm folk, just for a hot second. So in other words, when Black female lawyers, when we're engaged in recruiting, retention, trying to take care of all the diverse or attorneys of color, I should say, in our law firms, that translates into non-billable work, okay, that we often take upon us, and we need to spread the love. We just need to spread the love. Dean Mutcheson, we had an interesting conversation about this. Do you recall?
I do. I mean, one of the things that I have found really challenging, and particularly being a dean in this moment, and I think I'm not the only one here who's also the first, I'm the first Black woman, the first woman at all, and the first queer person to be the dean at my law school. So that's a lot to sort of walk into a space as a first. And I was appointed in 2019. And I think one of the things that I have found in the last couple of years to be so difficult is balancing the expectations that all of these different constituencies have for me, many of which they did not have for my predecessors, right? And particularly with students who, really want, they want me to wave that magic wand and to change, so many things about the institution. And if they gave me that wand, I would happily do it, but unfortunately I don't have one. And so figuring out how to be able to, be successful, make some of the changes that I want to make, do some things that frankly are going to be hard for people to untangle when I'm gone, right? Because I think that they're that important. And so I want to make them really part of the institution, but then also handling the extent to which I don't feel like I can do all of the things that I want to do. And then, the second thing that I think is really hard, and this is something, again, that I think all of my predecessors spent no time thinking about, is if I don't do well in this job, am I closing the door for people who are like me, right? And so, thinking about how do I do a job that makes sure that I'm not the last person like me who gets this job, or the last person like me for the next 20 or so years who gets this job. And that's a layer of responsibility that frankly, white men who have these jobs never have to think about.
OMG. Again, can I just say amen? So relate. First woman of color, august organization. Sheila, don't mess up. I'm just saying. Okay, so I get it. I get it. Woo. Okay, let's move on. HBCUs, for those who may not know, that stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Other than the obvious, meaning the predominant race of a law school population, do any of you think that there are identifiable or marked differences between law schools that are historically Black versus those that are not? And I've got to, of course, come to first the Howard Dean, Dean Holly Walker.
You did a really good HU, I think this is the third law school that I've taught at. It's the first HBCU I've ever been a professor at, and now an academic leader. I think probably the most important thing for us to really, as a profession, think about and talk about with the HBCUs is that the HBCUs are still predominantly responsible for producing Black lawyers for the profession, right? I think while we have great diversity and inclusion initiatives at pretty much every law school has a diversity and inclusion initiative, the numbers are the numbers. So every year when Howard graduates 160 lawyers and 150 of them are African-American, you would have to march through, 10, 20 other law schools, depending on their size, to get to that number. And so when you put together the Black graduates of North Carolina Central, Florida A&M, Southern, UDC, and Howard, you're really talking about a very critical number of Black lawyers that go into the profession every year. So that's the main thing that I tell people. You cannot be serious about diversity and inclusion, whether you are a law firm, a government employer, a nonprofit. You are not serious about diversity and inclusion unless, and I say this to other law schools too, unless you have some kind of established relationship with a historically Black college or university. That may be an HBCU undergrad. We know that 70% of all Black judges went to an HBCU for undergrad or law school. The numbers of judges, law firm partners, people who are high up in the profession who went to an HBCU is very, very high. And so that's what I tell everyone in the profession. When we were at 5% of our profession as Black lawyers, we're severely underrepresented. If you are serious about doing diversity and inclusion work, you must do it with HBCUs. You can do it with every other institution should do it too, but it is one of the most important things that I try to get across to people as I go around speaking about the profession. And it's something, honestly, that even though I grew up on the campus of an HBCU, I did not realize the magnitude of what HBCUs do for the legal profession until I became Dean of Howard and realized, oh my goodness, a lot of this is falling on us to do. And do we have the support? No, we do not have the resource support that we need. Do we have the support in terms of hiring? Yes, employers reach out to us and want to hire from us. But if you suggest to an employer that I only have 160 graduates to give you at Howard, why don't you go down the street to UDC or go to North Carolina Central, go to Florida A&M? The number of doors that are closed to the other HBCUs, not Howard. So I also always remind everyone, Howard is not the only HBCU in the country. Neither is Morehouse, neither is Spelman, neither is Hampton. Partner with the HBCUs that are near you. So if you're a bar association, you have HBCUs near you, partner with those HBCUs to really produce pipelines that increase the number of Black attorneys in the profession.
Friendly reminder, we had a little discussion also about the mission, how you believed that the mission was maybe a little
different. The mission is just fundamentally different. I'd say one of the great things about being at Howard is I don't have to be everything to everyone, right? I can unabashedly say our law school was founded to create racial justice. Our mission is to produce lawyers who are leaders in the profession to address all issues of social justice. We don't hide what we do. Everyone, and I say this at orientation, if you have come to Howard, regardless of your race, regardless of anything else, you must be deeply committed to justice. Racial justice, let's be clear, justice for Black people and for Latino people, for the LGBTQIA community. You must be deeply committed to justice. If you are not that person, you don't belong at Howard. And I can say that, right? Whereas most law school deans can never say that. And to me, it's a wonderful thing every day. I can really embrace that mission. And it's not something that most other law schools have the ability to do.
That's really special. I don't know, Dee Nelson, I thought, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I will add, having again had the fortunate opportunity to start my career at Thurgood Marshall School of Law, the school that Sweat built, after being denied unconstitutionally so admission into the University of Texas. One of the reasons why I love and TSU has and other HBCUs have such a special place in my heart is also their mission in giving opportunities to students who otherwise may not have them. TSU would give opportunities to students just like an Elizabeth Warren gave an opportunity to me and students that they see there is potential in. And again, we set up these arbitrary barriers, whether it's you have to have a certain Lsat, you have to have a certain GPA, you have to have graduated from a certain undergraduate or certain major, what have you. But these schools that see potential in these applicants and invite them in and nurture them. And again, they go out to be those change agents. They go out to be those social justice warriors. And that mission at that mission side, that accessibility side, is I think we also see in other schools, not just HBCUs, but they are particular. That's indeed the history of HBCUs, right? It's giving us that opportunity that otherwise would not have been available to us. And I think that is something that is very distinct and very special about HBCUs and why we should always support them, partner with them, and provide those great relationships and resources to make sure that we're continuing to support and nurture that great legacy.
Got it. So I'm trying to keep track of also some of these questions and comments. We have a comment. I thought I should just go ahead and share it. Someone said, don't you think that all women of color have this burden of which you are speaking? We have to constantly be engaged in closed-door conversations with the next generation to keep them from jumping off the cliff and leaving the profession. I've seen partners at major law firms spend upwards of 200 hours per year non-billable trying to keep the diverse associates from walking out. When I practiced in-house, it was the same thing. Being the only, or one of only few, diverse women who's looked at to mentor, sponsor the next generation. And it's always a tight rope to walk. Unless we recruit more of our white colleagues, and especially white male colleagues, to get on board, it may always fall to us. So I thought that was worth sharing. Okay, oh, there goes my clock. I'm sorry. I always have to deal with that when I'm on, but it helps me keeping time. So we're doing all right here. Let's talk about Black law school students. Has there recently been an increase or has there been a decline in the number of Black students applying to law schools? And if so, what do you believe is the reason for the rise or fall? Let's start with Dee Mutchison, please.
So, I mean, we had a very precipitous drop in law school applications several years ago. And even those of us who weren't deans at the time knew of that, right? Because it was a very clear thing that was happening. And then over the last year or so, we've seen this increase in applications. And with that increase in applications, we have seen a little bit of a bump for applications from people of color in general and from Black folks in general, but nowhere near the numbers that we need. Right. So when you on two levels. So one is just the raw numbers of folks who are taking the LSAT. The other, though, and I will take every opportunity that I have to bash US News and World Report. The other piece of it is that, so many schools are driven by these kinds of, LSAT numbers or whatever, as Eboni was talking about, such that a lot of our folks who, don't pay for a prep class or don't have time to do these things, are not scoring in those LSAT bands that would allow them to get into law school at all or to get into the law school of their choice. So we need to do a much, much better job at a much earlier age to start folks thinking about law school as an option and then mentoring them through that process. What does it take? When do you have to take the LSAT? How do you go through this process of applying for schools in order to get our numbers up? Because right now, there are just too few of us who are even thinking about going to law school.
Sheila, may I follow that comment? I'm going to do it by, if I may, returning to the question or commenter that you read earlier, who talked about finding white male allies in order to join the effort to maintain workforce diversity. With all due respect, I'm going to say that there is another, in my view, much more important, not exclusive way to improve retention, and that is to cease tokenism. And create communities that are places that are welcoming, that have a critical mass of people to fellowship with, and that do not require the kind of superhuman effort of one or two women or one or two Black people or people of color or people of any status category to carry the burden by themselves. So increasing the number of people who are going to create that community and share that burden would be the important step that law firms in particular could take, and creating a climate in which the people who are walking out the door do not create a void that you have to go and fill with one or more two people to say you checked the box and did it. So I'll stop there because I really do believe I have more than I have been given a platform to say on that topic. With respect to the numbers of African Americans particularly, but other people of color as well applying to law schools. This is a moment where we have seen in the nation's capital a real increase in the number of students that want to come here and set things right. And one of the things that I'm very proud of when I think about the mission at GW Law School, is that we are committed for the time being, while this person is dean, we are committed to not just having the number be the number we want to report to the ABA or the number that we want to report to US News and World Report, but to really be the number that is going to impact a just democracy. I am envious beyond words of Dean Holly Walker when she says social justice is at the core of her mission. Social justice may be at the core of my deanship, but it is it's a new vision for PWI. And the fact that we are in the nation's capital is an opportunity for us to say to other African Americans who want to come to the seat of democracy and the seat of government in this country and educate people to be contributors to democracy and a fair and just society around the world. Come on, y'all, now is the time. Jump in, the water is good for your admission here to the law school. But when we graduate them, because we were talking to the New York Bar Association, we need to send them into firms, into public interest organizations, into corporations that will hire them in great numbers. And that will continue to be a part of the incentive to apply to law school, increase the numbers.
Thanks so much for that. I will say part of the reasoning or factors for choosing you specific for is because we do believe that your schools tend to feed into the New York City legal community. So I do want to make that clear. Also, we have a question from the audience, which I think is on point with what we're discussing now. The question is this: what advice would you give to first-generation Black women who are navigating and applying to law school? Anybody?
Yes, and that's actually the question that I wanted to address as part of this conversation is, one of the pieces of advice I would give is to really reach out to one of us, reach out to someone who has gone through that process, because it is indeed a process. And there are aspects of it, particularly with regards to timing. One of the mistakes we see applicants of color make way too often is applying later than other applicants. And depending on the school that you're applying to, some schools have, what's called a rolling admission. At UConn, we have a rolling admission such that when the application season opens, after a couple of months, we've got applications and decisions start getting made. So decisions are starting to get made as early as November, December, and along with those decisions, financial aid packages are starting to be put together and offered. And oftentimes the statistics show that applicants of color are not applying until later in a cycle. So not until February, March even. And some of those admission seats have already been taken, particularly if you think about last year where there was this influx of applications that schools really were not prepared for. You saw those admissions decisions stop in early February, when before they would have gone to March or April so that we weren't overfilling our class. And so getting with mentors to just talk about timing. I just sat down with an African-American female student just last week to say, okay, when are you hoping to enroll as your endpoint? And then backing up from there with regards to when you want to take the Lsat. How many times do you want to take the Lsat? Where can you find that time to study? By what deadline do you want to have those applications in, which I try to say Thanksgiving, to try to have those applications already in. So just getting with someone to mentor you and to walk you through that process. And I must say, although again, we can talk about, the issues with regards to the Lsat, I will say that the Law School Admission Council, so LSAC that administers the Lsat, but they do have great resources for students of color and applicants of color, particularly their Discover Law series where you can get a lot of great information. They also have a free Lsat prep course that is offered by Khan Academy. And so that is another great resource because we know Many of you are probably like I was. I could not afford a $600 or $700 LSAT prep course. So I had the book and that was it. So to have this great resource, so get with mentors so they can tell you about those resources and help walk you through the process to get you to have put your best foot forward as possible.
Thank you so much. And I'd be remiss if I didn't shout out my beloved New York City Bar Association, especially the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We have programming for not just college students, but even high school students who are thinking about wanting to go into law. And we do assist with exactly the kinds of programming that Dee Nelson was just discussing. So thank you.
Can I add one more thing for folks who
Sure.
are applying to law school? Once you get in and you start getting financial aid numbers, and I know a lot of us go to law school because math isn't our thing, I get it. But pay attention to those numbers, right? So it's not just about how much money someone's giving you, it's how much money is someone giving you as compared to the overall tuition and fees, right? So we'll have students, and we're a state school, so we're a lot cheaper than other schools, and students will say, well, such and such school is giving me $35,000. And we're like, that's more than our tuition. Right? So you're still going to be paying a lot more money. So, there's the need to be as financially savvy as you can when you are going into law school, because when you graduate with 6 figures of debt, it completely changes the life choices that you get to make. So don't just look at, what the rank is or any of those things. Make sure that when you graduate from law school, you're still going to have some money in the bank.
I think that's wise, sound advice. I'm actually going to stay with you, Dean Mutcheson, if I might. We're talking about getting into law school. We all know that there are standardized tests. Okay, we got the LSAT. And then later, just to even get into the profession, you have to take the bar exam. And there are a lot of discussions about standardized testing, and are they a reliable measure of competence? And are there socioeconomic and racial factors we should be considering? Please share your thoughts about that.
Well, I'll start at the beginning and then I'll go to the end, because the end is really where my pet peeve is right now. But the LSAT, LSAC is very clear about what it reflects, right? And what it reflects is basically how you're going to do your first year of law school, right? And they're very clear that schools should not be putting, enormous weight on that you should be doing a holistic review of your application. So to the extent that the LSAT is being misused in the admissions process, I'm willing to put that on law schools as opposed to necessarily on the LSAT and on LSAC. But we do know that there are significant disparate test scores that we see coming out from communities of color, particularly black and brown communities versus white folks who are taking the test. But the thing that I'm really focused on now is the ways that the bar exam acts as a gatekeeping mechanism to the profession. And as I always say to folks, if you want to throw down with me about how the bar exam is this very important measure of competence as an attorney, we can have that fight, because I know I'm right and you're wrong, right? There's nothing about the bar exam that tells us whether someone's going to be a good lawyer, whether they're going to be ethical, what kind of clients they're going to serve. And the bar exam was created to keep lots of folks who look like us out of the profession in the first instance. And again, we see these disparate impacts on communities of color, on people who are low income, on people with disabilities from the bar exam. And so that is another piece where, there's some really good advocacy that's going on right now, particularly among younger law school graduates, which I think is terrific. And, we're doing some work in New Jersey. There's great work going on in Oregon, but we really need to look at the bar exam as well, which, it's sort of one of those things where people think, oh, this is a rite of passage, everybody has to do it. But if it doesn't serve the purpose that we claim that it is serving, then we really need to ask ourselves some questions about why we are continuing to force people to pay thousands of dollars for prep tests in order to take this exam, and then go through a character and fitness process, which is also one that potentially has really negative impacts on particular communities of people.
Ooh, that was pretty thorough. Anybody else want to add something? Okay, let's move on.
Can I
So,
add one quick thing? I'm sorry about that.
Sure.
Another thing about the LSAT related to the question before. Another really great thing to think about with the LSAT is that when you are considering schools, schools are reporting just the median. You know, they're not reporting what the range of LSAT scores or the range of GPAs that they're accepting. And so I always advise prospective students to call up your admissions offices and ask them, what is the range? Because often we as women, we as, you know, prospective students of color, you know, we'll see that, oh, this school's median is 170. And we don't think that means half of the class, you know, can be above that, half of the class can be below that. And so if the school has taken a 155 or 160 or what have you, and you're in that range, that is a plausible school for you, but we'll just see the 170 and not even apply in the first place. So again, look at the range, but also know that you are not your number. Your number is just how you perform during 3 hours on a Saturday. It does not mean the type of law student you're going to be, or the type of lawyer you're going to be, or the type of advocate you're going to be. So we can't get caught up and internalize these numbers, particularly when we know that there are potential issues, you know, with how those numbers are even created in the first place.
I hope the aspiring lawyers are out there soaking all of this in, okay? Positive energy, these are words of wisdom. Okay, last year, we all watched the public murder of George Floyd, and it has indeed caused what I like to call a racial reckoning here in the United States. Curious about how your respective universities have responded. You know, have you found that there's more unity among students of color and faculty, or maybe more chasms? Just curious what's been happening at your respective institutions. I guess I'll start with Dee Nelson, since you're here.
Well, I will say, and of course, you know, my last year was virtual. And I think that that does kind of impacted things to a certain extent. But I will say overall, it did bring us more together. Now, granted, I wasn't here to see exactly how we were before, but you know, in talking particularly with the BALSA students and talking with our faculty of color, it did provide the opportunity to have these difficult conversations and these very open and honest and transparent conversations that I don't believe members of the law school community have been having, you know, in the past. And so I think the empathy and the understanding that that helped to foster in really did help unite. But I think, again, the fact that we were going through that on top of another pandemic, not just the racial injustice pandemic, but also, you know, with COVID-19, thankfully at UConn, you know, we really are a very supportive community. And so we really saw that support on both ends. Now, was everything perfect? No. Was there more we could do? Absolutely. But overall, I felt that it really brought our community together. It really provided the opportunity for conversations that needed to be had and conversations that we're continuing. We are talking about implicit bias in hiring. We're talking about ways to bring more diversity into our classrooms and into our discussions so that our students, particularly our students of color, are learning about the law in the context in which the law is actually happening that truly, you know, oftentimes affects their communities in a different way than others. But I think overall, it did bring us closer together. But again, we were being brought together in a virtual sense. So not as close as we could have been probably had we had those conversations in person.
Okay, that's up in Connecticut. Let's move over actually to New Jersey. Tell me, Dean.
It was a rocky year for us, I'll say. I mean, definitely had its ups and downs. You know, Eboni was talking earlier about having these, you know, so many weepy moments. I remember crying at a virtual town hall for the entire law school. That was not my plan for the day. So, you know, I mean, there were a lot of hard conversations that happened. And frankly, you know, I say this all the time, many law schools, I'll say, are very conservative institutions. And I don't mean that politically. There are places that are slow to change, and people who, you know, have tenure and don't feel like they have to change. So, you know, we really committed ourselves institutionally at Rutgers to, you know, doing an audit. You know, this goes to the work that Danielle and I did with a few other Black women law deans about, you know, really looking at your law school, looking at your curriculum, looking at your hiring and promotion practices, looking at your career development office, and being really honest with yourself about how those things are working and the ways in which they are impacting particular students and particular faculty and staff in your building. So that's really an ongoing project. And as I was saying earlier, it's a project where, you know, our students have this really strong sense of urgency, which I totally understand. But we're trying to move a place where people say, but we've been doing it like this for, you know, X number of years. This is what law school is. And really trying to help them understand that the fact that this is what law school is doesn't mean this is what law school should be, or that this is what law school has to be. So there's a lot of work to be done still, I think.
Thank you. Dean Matthew, there was a phrase you used. I think I wrote it down somewhere, but I want to say it was like selective unity. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Explain that.
Some of the unity is performative. That is responding to the moment and the mandate to not stay silent, but not necessarily do more than not stay silent. The privilege of being in DC was that I could go down to the Black Lives Matter Plaza, and I could see the undeniable evidence that people from all backgrounds, ages, abilities are marching to say we won't tolerate a country that stands for this kind of killing, this kind of oppression anymore. So there is an undeniable change in this moment of racial reckoning, in my view. I believe that my institution, the questions about my institution, has seized that moment selectively. I'm ecstatic about the fact that more have than have not. And that's why I'm here. We're starting an institute on racial equity. We are investing in students from African American, Latinx American, and Native American backgrounds like never before. We are doing things that respond to the moment, like every law school is doing. Everybody in the country is doing this. And I intend to make it mean something here. But I say selective because, like Dean Mutcheson has said, law schools are institutions that are slow to change. And so I am fulfilled, energized, excited by the fact that so many are ready to do more than just perform or give lip service to change. I'll close by saying at this law school, we had a unanimously adopted resolution to become an anti-racist law school. Where did we get the inspiration? From the clearinghouse that Kim, Dean Mutcheson, and others so diligently worked on to give us resources. We are implementing that and seizing the moment, but it really does take all of us working together and shoring each other up in order to get the job done.
Wonderful. Now, again, I have to shout out my firm, Arnold & Porter, because we engaged in some work that was specifically directed at the Black community. One of the projects was something I proffered, and it was a vision of mine, and now it's come to fruition. I'm excited. We poured in money and partnered with the National Bar Association to establish an Academy of Excellence for Law Firm Associates, Black law firm associates, to help them in their junior years, 1 through 3, to help teach them and to embolden them and empower them so that they will succeed. So very excited about that. But let's talk a little more. I want to hear a little more about this anti-racism institution. I have to say, I was recently, I watched a wonderful presentation by Judith Greene. I guess she's the executive director and CEO of AALS. what is that? Association of American Law Schools? Do I have
That's
right?
it. You got it.
Okay, all right, just want to make sure. And she referred to this project, and I was like, oh my God, I'm getting to speak with the ladies who helped to institute it, because she gave a shout out, just so you know, to Deans Holly Walker and Mutcheson. So I'm going to come back to you again, Dean Mutcheson, I guess first. You started to talk about it a little bit, but can you tell us how it came into being?
I actually want to turn it over to Dean Holly Walker, because I feel like I've talked too much. But she does a great job of laying out where the clearinghouse came from. So I'm gonna throw it to you, Danielle.
Thank you for that. Even though you have not been talking too much, I'm like, I just enjoy, it's so funny. I was like, we never get to spend time together like this. And even though we're doing it in front of an audience, it is just wonderful to be with all of you this evening and just hear all the tremendous work that you're doing. So the Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project, I think it really emerged from this idea that, you know, since the murder of Trayvon Martin and then Michael Brown in Ferguson, I think something that we saw was that law school deans were expected to put out these statements, right? Write letters to your community about the tragedies that we were experiencing as a country. And the question was, why are we writing these statements? What's happening when we write these statements and put them out to our community? And many of us did not write these statements, right? So there were lots of law deans who had never written one of these statements. And then when George Floyd was murdered publicly, every single one of us needed to write a statement. And I think Danielle Conway, who's an amazing Howard Law graduate, dean of Penn State Dickinson College of Law, she called a number of people and she held up two photos. One was the Black victims of police violence who had been murdered, and the other was a picture of all of the Black law deans. And she asked the important question, is there any difference in these two pictures? And we realized for all of us, on any given day, at any given time, any of us, just because we're law school deans doesn't mean that we couldn't be victims of this kind of violence, our families, our loved ones, our communities. And I think what it did is it just crystallized for us that the statements were not enough. We needed to do more. And I will say, I was not a huge part in the crafting, I think, of what are the core parts of this, but I think we all agreed that there were some key things that needed to happen. Number one, and this is in stages, I encourage everyone to look at the Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project for AALS. Listening, really understanding what are the problems of these communities, why this is happening, really educating yourself, because just because we're lawyers does not mean we understand the roots of structural racism, why we have police brutality, why we need serious criminal justice and police reform. Just because we're lawyers does not mean we are well educated on these topics. Look at all of the horrific things that lawyers did over the last 4 years. So being a lawyer does not, or a law professor or a law student does not mean that you are anti-racist, does not mean that you are ready to participate in the project of breaking down structural racism. So listening, really educating ourselves, then auditing. And I think to me, that is my favorite part of the Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project, is what Kim talked about, which is that, and what Dean Matthew has led so bravely at GW, is these commitments, making sure that is your faculty ready to sign on to a resolution that you want to be an anti-racist law school? Are you ready to really audit? How many students of color are you admitting? How many students of color are you graduating? How many students of color are getting great jobs and passing the bar? As law schools, we have to ask these tough questions, and we can't be leaders in terms of the Anti-Racist Project until we make things right at home. And for many of us, our houses are in a mess. They're absolutely in disarray. And so it's very hard to lead as law schools if we don't clean our own houses. And that's a huge part of the Anti-Racist Project, is to say to law schools, if we are leaders in the profession, if we are educating the next generation of lawyers, we have to make sure that we are doing a good job in terms of leading anti-racist institutions ourselves.
Dean Holly Walker, sorry, Dean Matthew, you wanted to add something?
I just want to add that the clearinghouse has inspired us to go even beyond what is in the audit, to count our students of color. But the audit involves how we're educating students in predominantly white classes as well. So one of the things that I can say is that we have really been motivated to look at our curriculum and look at how often information shows up that will train the next generation of leaders to be race conscious and anti-racist in their leadership and service in the profession. We've talked a lot about signing a resolution, but does it mean that I actually teach my class differently, that I hold hard conversations in class differently, that I hold students accountable for remarks that they make during class if they need to be challenged, if I myself, as a faculty member, hold myself accountable for things that I have said that come out of a non-anti-racist perspective, but looking deeply in the way that we actually conceive of and deliver our curriculum and education. Again, I return to Lonnie Guinier's article. That is a political act. And deciding to change the way we educate and change the way we deliver the information about what is truth and what is law makes a huge difference. I always tell people that when I have conversations with any Black man in my family, they've all got a story about how they had an interaction with the police and it wasn't a good interaction. They're lucky to be alive. I don't teach evidence the way that a white person who doesn't have that in their family teaches it. I don't teach that running from the police is evidence of guilt when I teach Rule 403. And neither should you if you have understood what it means to live Black and brown in this country now. So I'm looking for also opportunities to make deep systemic changes in legal education in order to be an anti-racist institution.
Dean Matthews preaching now. Okay. I'm sorry, but this is a nice segue. I got to skip some of the stuff we were going to do for a minute because it's a nice segue to go to critical race theory. Okay. It's become a controversial topic, and not just in the legal community. You know, it used to be just Kim Crenshaw, Derek Bell, you know, it just used to be amongst us. Now it's gone beyond our profession. It is actually a part of the discourse in our nation. Folks who don't even know what it is. Let me just be clear. So Dean Mutcheson, what do you think? Any shed some light on this, please?
Well, you know, as I said, one of the people who was incredibly inspirational to me as a law student was Kim Crenshaw, right? You know, took an intersectionality seminar with Kim Crenshaw, which is pretty amazing. So,
me too.
You know, yeah, right. I mean, it was great. You know, I feel like we are living in a country that is in such deep crisis right now. And in particular, a country that is so unwilling to, whether we're in a racial reckoning or not, incredibly unwilling to reckon with the truth of our history. And in particular, with the many ways in which that history continues to impact how people live today and the choices that we get to make as we move through the world today. So, you know, watching this incredibly cynical campaign that was basically concocted by one person, right? We're going to start talking about critical race theory in this incredibly broad way that has nothing to do with the work with what the work actually is. And then we're going to start convincing people who are already upset and angry as they're watching America become something that it's not supposed to be, right? We're going to tell those people, this is what they're teaching your children so that your children won't be proud of themselves and your children are being told that they're racist. And, you know, there's something really amazing about watching people bend over backwards to pretend that when this country was founded, it was founded for all of us. It's just really striking. So it's on one hand, it makes perfect sense for the time that we're living in, where, you know, truth has become this sort of toy that you play with as opposed to an actual thing. But it's also really frightening, right? To imagine the kids who are being raised in homes where a parent would say, you know, you don't get to teach about Ruby Bridges because there isn't a sufficient redemption arc for the white people. I mean, that's shocking. And yet that's the world that we're living in right now.
Dee Nelson, I know we talked a lot about it. Is there anything you wanted to add?
I would just add that, it's just really sad to me, right? Everything that Dee Mutchison just said, and this conflating, that just simply talking about race is critical race theory. Critical race theory is its own, it's particularly lens through which you're examining things. I've taught race in class and education for 20 years. I'm not a critical race theorist, I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's sad to me because it's when there is this call to, kind of go back to when they see us, right? When there is this call to, talk about what we experience, what people who look like us experience, what other people of color in this country experience and have experienced. Somehow we don't get to talk about that. Our children aren't allowed to be taught about that because we're concerned about how it's going to make the other groups feel or the other group feel. And it just really saddens me because it makes me think about what are we saying to our children about their worth, their identity, their history. We have been learning about American history for forever, a certain view of it, a certain truth of it, but not the full truth. And it just saddens me. And I guess, of course, I've always realized this, but just again, this attack, when we think about the real problems we have in this country and in this world, and all of the other things our focus should be on, the fact that this has become, such an issue, it's just really saddens me, quite honestly. And it saddens me to think about our children who have to deal with that.
And I think the only thing I would add to any of that is that this is a backlash, right? So I think the idea that, the kind of anti-critical race theory movement came from nowhere, essentially this was a reaction to things like the Anti-Racist Clearinghouse Project and to corporations putting together racial justice funds and to CEOs making statements after the murder of George Floyd that we believe that structural racism is a problem. The anti-critical race theory movement or anti-truth. And the truth is we also need to start talking about the critical race theory issue as really just another, way of banning books and of censorship. So on the ground, what this is looking like is, not being able to, people having funding cut off from schools if they talk about the 1619 Project, the naming of people. If you teach anything by Nicole Hannah-Jones or Ta-Nehisi Coates or any of these people, and that's why it's Banned Books Week, right? Because we're in a period of our history where we're actually banning books and censoring what people can say. The Black principal in Texas who was fired, one who was suspended for just posting a picture with his wife who was white. This is what we're talking about. This is a period of censorship and banning books. And so I think addressing it as a critical race theory controversy, I think is one way also of them framing it in a way that takes it away from the core of what it is, which is silencing people from telling their truth and from talking about history. And anytime you see banning books and just the attempt to curtail learning in any way, I think we all should be alarmed. So that's the thing is, again, it's not about, as the person said in the question, it's not about what we all feel about it, but what do other people, particularly our white counterparts, feel about banning books and censorship? Because if you don't believe in banning books and censorship, you don't believe in banning anything that is labeled as critical race theory.
Well said. Okay, I want to stay with you because I'm going to go back to where I wanted to go before. This has been awesome. I'm loving you ladies. Can I just say I'm having so much fun? I'm going to ask you the rhetorical question, but at the root of it, I really just want you to explain why it's important. Do you believe that we need to have more Black students and professionals enter academia? Why or why not?
Oh, absolutely. I think for all the reasons you just heard, I mean, when you hear who inspired each one of us to come into the law and to do the work that we do, so much of that work is done by Black academics. They are the people who we see as role models, right? So when you come into law school and you have that opportunity for the first time, if you were lucky enough, some people went through all of law school without ever having a Black professor. I think all of us, I was the first Black woman who was hired full-time onto the faculty at University of South Carolina. And I think what I saw, in that role as a first in 2005 is that my students of all colors were longing to learn from people who look like America looks, right? So to be taught in a classroom by people who are not a reflection of their communities is detrimental to all of our students. I think we really, as professors, should represent the full kind of diversity of what we see in the United States and around the world. And so I think it's very, very important. The flip side of it, I also like to talk about the burdens when we talk about the benefits, is that so many of us are exhausting ourselves because we're the only one, or we're one of only two. We are paying all of the diversity taxes. That's what we used to like to call them. Diversity taxes. You're sitting on every committee. You sit on the admissions committee. You're on the career services committee. You're on the judicial clerkship committee. You're on every university committee. Oh, there's an anti-racist task force. Why don't you do that? Surprise, present, you are now the, associate dean for diversity. You have no resources, no raise, no office, but yet you are in charge of diversity. So I'm like, we need more Black academics so that those of us who are in the profession can make it to 65 or 70, because we need support, we need help. I mean, it's the same thing for our, 1.8% Black women partners in law firms. We need, we need more support. We need more people to do this work.
Agreed. Dean Mutcheson, are there particular areas of law which you tend to encourage Black law school students to enter? Why or why not?
I really don't. I mean, my basic position is, find the work that you want to do and the work that is fulfilling for you. And, even though I don't get to teach at Howard, and I don't get to lead Howard, I very much, I come from a public interest background. I believe very much that social justice is the highest calling of earning a law degree. And, what I say to my students all the time is, no matter where you're working, there are opportunities for you to do justice and to do good in the world. And so, go to the law firms, because frankly, I need you to give some money back to the school. But
that's honest.
But you can do pro bono work. There's so much that people can do with their lives, and even just being the person in the room who says, "Why are there no Black women here? Why are there no other?" That is a really key thing to have happen as well. So take the job that lets you do what you want to do, and then do good things with it.
Dee Nelson, because we had an interesting conversation.
Now, I couldn't agree more. And the aspect that I would add is, I often tell Black students that are saying, I'm interested in corporate law, or I'm interested in labor and employment, but I don't want to go to a firm because I don't want to be on that side. I don't want to be, quote unquote, working for the man. And I say to them,
like me? Just saying. Okay, I'm sorry. Continue.
I say to them, we are needed everywhere, right? And as Dean Mutcheson just said, we can be that warrior for justice, regardless of the role in which we sit. So if we're in the DA's office, if we're in the prosecutor's office, if we're on defense counsel of labor employment case, we can help people to see things that maybe they wouldn't have seen before. We can counsel our clients that perhaps did something inappropriate. Instead of fighting it and making this plaintiff basically end up getting up because he or she doesn't have the funds to deal with all of this, we can give good counsel of, let's think about what the right thing to do is here. So that power, and I will tell you, it was a Black female mentor of mine at Baker Botts when I was a first-year summer associate, who is now a tenured African-American female professor at South Texas College of Law, Professor Najri Mathis Rutledge, who taught me that lesson, because she was, in that labor and employment section. And she's the one who explained it that way to me. We all know about prosecutorial discretion. We don't want only the same people who may not look like us or have our experiences exercising that discretion. So we need our diverse students going into those roles. So that's the only kind of counsel I give. I agree. I say you go and you do what your passion is. When it comes to law firms, I tell them the money is good enough to get you there. Oftentimes it's not good enough to keep you there. So you have to kind of really see what your passion is. But again, if you want to do justice, if you want to help make things better, you can do that in these roles that you think may be cutting against your community. You need to be in those spaces, providing that rich perspective to help move the ball further towards justice.
Dean Holly Walker, you gave me a slightly different answer because you are at an HBCU, so please share.
I think the only thing I would say is we specifically have a mission to create more Black lawyers in spaces where the profession has very, very few. So beyond obviously our focus in civil rights law, we've adopted a few other key areas of focus that were really determined by the need for more diversity in those areas. So in particular, we focus on corporate law, intellectual property. We also focus on alternative dispute resolution because of the very small numbers of Black arbitrators, mediators, that are in the profession. And then lastly, environmental law, because we know environmental justice is so critical to our communities. Not a lot of Black lawyers go into that field. So we've created some areas of focus. So I don't encourage any student to go into any particular field, but we do, one of our missions for Howard is to increase the number of Black attorneys in every area, but in particular areas where there are very small numbers, we want to grow our specialties in those areas. In service to the profession is a huge part of why we do that.
Okay, I want to try to get in just a few more questions. We're almost done here, but there's a question from the audience. How are your respective law schools faring with judicial clerkships, especially for students of color and other traditionally underrepresented demographics? She happens to be a state judge. Shout out to you, you know who you are. Anybody?
I'll start. There is a survey that gets done annually, and it looks at the relative placement of clerks on different courts from different law schools. And recently, the George Washington University Law School fared very, very well among the top 10 schools in placing clerks on the United States Supreme Court. And I was really happy about that. I was ecstatic about that. That's exciting. But because of the demography of the clerks on the United States Supreme Court, that means that we are missing opportunities to place students of color in every other court in the nation: state, magistrate, federal district, and appellate. And so we actually, one of my mottos is I'm going to do this job differently than anybody else would do it if it wasn't for me and my background being here. So we have a school-wide initiative now to increase the breadth of the success that we've had on the United States Supreme Court throughout the judiciary in this nation. And that will touch all students. That does, in my view, kind of dovetail on the question that was asked before. I agree with absolutely everything my sister Dean said, but there's enough injustice and inequity to go around no matter where you find yourself. You can start fixing it wherever you find yourself. So right now, one of the things we're doing at GW Law is broadening the success that we've had at the United States Supreme Court to other courts, and that will help diversify the number of clerks that are on the bench. But I got on the bar about hiring, and I'm gonna ask judges in the audience also to reach a little further than the top 10% in order of the coif in order to hire clerks into your chambers, to take calls from professors that will give you a holistic view of the student that might not have made it in your cut in the first round if you were using your traditional criteria. But it is time for us to, I think, look at criteria that do not simply replicate the hierarchies that we have had in the clerkship area historically. If we're going to tear those down and dismantle them, we have to do it with help.
Agreed. Okay, it's time for lightning round questions. I guys have some more here. Let's see. One, there's an audience question. Are there any efforts at the law school level to push and educate graduating students to form their own firms rather than interviewing at the traditional firms? Any one of you, please.
this is something that we started a few years ago. And I realized that, and I think at University of South Carolina, we knew that many of our students would go into small or mid-sized firms. And so there were some efforts put there. At Howard, we've now created a full course that teaches students how to start their own firms, especially on the plaintiff side. So much of what we do as law school is focused on the defense bar and teaching students to be members of the defense bar. And not a lot is done to teach students what happens when you want to represent plaintiffs. And you want to do that work in a really high quality, high end way. So you still, make plenty of money, et cetera. And so we started a whole course that's called How Do You Start a High-End Plaintiff's Practice? And we use lots of our own very successful alumni to teach them the ins and outs of business, marketing, how you make sure that you stay within ethical lines, keeping client funds separate, all of the kind of pitfalls that can come with young attorneys starting their own firms. One of the things, David Wilkins, who was one of my favorite professors in law school, he came and gave a lecture a few years ago at Howard, and he said, students now don't want to practice law in the way that we all were brought up to practice law, right? They don't want to go to a law firm and stay there for the next 30 years. They want to follow their passion. And many of the times they believe that their passion is something that they will create and build themselves. And so we do our students a disservice when we don't give them the tools in law school to be able to follow that passion in the way that they see it. The entrepreneurial spirit of our students is tremendous. And I feel like it's something that as law schools, we have to really work on kind of nurturing and building and supporting that entrepreneurial spirit, because we see that that is really, I think, the future of a lot of law practice will be more entrepreneurial. And there's a reason why many students of color want to build their own instead of following the traditional career paths that we've seen in the law. So I'm very supportive of the idea that all law schools should help support and educate students who want to build their own practices instead of going into the more traditional legal employment.
Dee Nelson, really quickly, I need you to be our representatives. What are some ways that bar associations can productively assist or partner with law schools?
Well, of course, one way is, panels like this where we get the opportunity to interact between the bar and law schools. So when we call up and we ask, to come visit the law schools, asking local bar associations to be engaged with the law school, that's of course one way. Mentorship and again, sponsorship is very important, but helping with that pipeline. Helping to, provide job opportunities and clerkship opportunities for our students are a great way to give them that experience while they're students, to give them that inspiration, to give them that confidence, to know that they're going to have great experiences out in practice, regardless of the area that they go into, because they've had that opportunity to connect with local attorneys that have helped them, show them the way throughout their law school experience to help prepare them for the practice. Some of that you don't get taught, as we all know. There's a lot about the practice of law that you don't get taught in law school and how to navigate those different areas after you get in practice. So I think those are some of the ways that great partnership between bar associations and law schools can help our students.
Thank you. Can I just say, this is a partnership with Dean Diller at Fordham, right? So the Bar of Hope, I have to tell you, I have to confess, I have to testify, we do this. And I'm so excited. I speak often to law school students in the New York City metropolitan area. We have student liaisons to the city bar. We have students on committees so that they can network and learn. So awesome. Dean Mutcheson, for those in our audience, who are individual attorneys who might want to be of some kind of assistance or engage in law school matters, what do you tell them? What are some ideas?
Well, one of the things that I actually really encourage people to think about, especially if you're one of those people who, loves to work with young attorneys and you're a good mentor and all of that good stuff, think about being an adjunct professor. Adjunct professors are a really wonderful way that we get to bring people into the law school and diversify the ranks of folks who are standing in front of our students. And what I found when I was vice dean, where, I got to hire all of our adjuncts, is I would, regularly get either phone calls or emails from white male alums who were convinced that they would be wonderful teachers, and why didn't I just hire them? But I would have to really heavily recruit women and people of color, right? They just did not assume that they could be in the classroom. You can be in the classroom, and it's actually really wonderful to have you. So reach out to your local law school and see what they're looking for.
And I'll just add to that. I mean, at Columbia Law School, again, shout out to my alma mater. I've gone there and I've done mock interviews with students. I've gone there, I've helped them with resume writing. So there are a lot of ways in which you can actually contribute. All right, we got through all the topics and questions I really wanted to get through. So bless you, all of you. I want to give you a chance to kind of just give some final remarks or thoughts, and maybe especially keep in mind those who might have an interest in academia. Make your pitch, but make it short, please.
I want to go first because I want to pitch law graduates going back to their law schools and giving money for students of color to attend law school. I think if you are an alum, your money speaks volumes. If you can help other students of color financially, you will help diversify the profession. If you can fund a professorship for the study of law for people of color, you will help your institution immensely, and you will change the profession. So I guess my pitch is actually to graduates, and I will let my sister deans pitch to those who want to join the academy.
Well, I agree with Dean Matthew, and I would say give of your time, your talent, and your treasure, because again, we can really benefit, and our law students can really benefit from all of that. But for those who are interested in becoming law professors, do pursue it. Again, whether that's taking a baby step, is actually not so much of a baby step. It is very hard work to be an adjunct, have a full-time job, and then teach, but it is very rewarding. But do reach out for that mentorship. We did not happen to have 28 Black female deans of law schools by happenstance. That was through cultivation, that was through vision of wonderful dean at VU, Angela Nwachie-Willick, and all of my sister deans.
28.
Yes, 28, which is amazing. And that's not 28, that didn't just happen, right? That was really through intentionality. And so we want to be there for you all who have that interest. It is never too late, and it's also never too early. So even if you just graduated, you've only been practicing for a couple of years like I did, but you have that interest, please do reach out. We love giving. And again, we give a lot, but we will always be there for anyone who is interested in joining the academy, because we need your voices and we need your perspectives.
The only thing that I will add to that, I mean, I 100% agree with that. And the only thing that I will add to that is that this is a really great time. If you are a person of color who is looking to get into the legal academy, this is a great time, right? So first of all, lots of us are in charge, and we are making demands of our faculty and how we hire and what our expectations are of that hiring. But we also had a downturn for a while in hiring, and this year it seems like every law school is hiring faculty, and lots of folks are looking for people who will do critical race theory or who will add something to the curriculum that they don't have already. So if it's something that's been sort of percolating in the back of your head, call me. Send me an email, because this is the time to really talk about it.
I would say the only other thing I'd want to add, and this really extends on Dee Nelson's comment, is that I think so many of us find ourselves in this seat because we supported and mentored each other and really helped each other. I think for any young law student or young lawyer or even experienced lawyer who's on the call, I think, we talked last night about this idea of having a mentor, having people who are supporting you, and having people who are sponsoring you, right? So having those peers who are supporting you, having mentors who are giving you guidance, and having sponsors who are really talking about you when you're not in the room, and the need to cultivate all of those different relationships. And I think that's what we've seen, and is common for every single one of us who's come to this place can talk to you about the people who helped support us, who inspired us as we came along the way. And so we hope to be that for other people, and to really, provide as much as we can in terms of guidance, support, mentorship, inspiration to know that we may be the first. For many of us, we are the first. There's a lot of first on this phone call, but we definitely will not be the last. We will have 5 more, 6 more with us before we leave, and a lot more than that. And to me, that's the inspiration of this group of sister deans, is I know that each one of them got into this because they love the law, they love their students, their institutions, want to make the world a more just place, and are absolutely determined that we are laying the groundwork for even more exciting, outstanding leadership from Black women in every sector that you can imagine.
I want to repeat and resonate that one sentence. We will not be the last. Amen to that. It has been such a treat, a blessing, an honor. I've been getting emails, and in the chat, folks are talking about how wonderful this has been. I want you to know this is recorded, and our City Bar members, they tend to sometimes not come live, but they will be looking at it later. Let me know if you need a copy of the recordings as well. Please, a big thank you to Matthew Diller of Fordham University, the dean there, Fordham University Law School. He is one of my allies. He's a dear friend. I just bless you. I so wish this could have been in person, because I'm telling you, ladies, people would be on their feet. We'd be shouting, we'd be clapping for you. I need you to know how proud I am of each one of you. God bless you and all that you do. Again, everybody, Dean Danielle Holly Walker of Howard University School of Law, Dean Kimberly Mutchison of Rutgers Law School, Dean Dayna Matthew of George Washington University Law School, and we had Dean Eboni Nelson of the University of Connecticut School of Law. Let's support these ladies. Let's support their law schools. Let's support students of color. Thank you, my Bar of Hope. I'm so grateful to you for being with us this evening. I want everybody to take good care of yourselves, mind, body, and soul. God bless all. And thank you again, ladies. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. It's good to see everybody.
It's
Great to
wonderful to
see
see
you.
everybody.
And
I'm
support
gonna,
President Boston.
yes, we're so proud of you.
We're so
are
proud of
so
you.
proud of you.
Yeah. Good night, all.
Good
Night,
night.
everybody.